tell me your clown name and how you came up with that, if you could.
Oh, well, that's a good story. Well, I started, as a street performer, as a juggler on the street. I wasn't a clown at all, and I discovered my sense of humor had some abilities or some mileage, and I started getting into my sense of humor and being funny as opposed to just being a juggler. First, that was just words or phrases or even sentences accompanying certain juggling tricks. And at that point, I was starting to get some gigs. This guy from the Winnipeg Folk Festival hired me for the next year, and I was working mostly in Montreal at that time. And so I called myself Moshe le Nuage, Moshe the Cloud. And it was only because I enjoyed looking at clouds and because they wanted to put my name on a poster and I needed a name. So,
I love it.
And then, so that stuck for a little while, and I forget, there are a few in between. I came up with the name Yoo-Hoo, which came because I would stand on my suitcase and wave my hands to gather an audience. This was like in 85, 86. I'd be going, Yoo-Hoo, and I wouldn't really be looking at the people. I'd just be like, Yoo-Hoo. And then again, I was like, well, I'm not really a cloud. That's not the energy I present on stage. So I got to find something a little better. So then it became Mr. Yoo-Hoo, and that kind of stuck for no real reason, just the absurdity of it, I guess. I didn't know it was a chocolate drink. I had no idea. Yeah.
So I love the way the prefix Mr. on one side of things will connote adulthood and seriousness and sort of authority that comes with being a grown-up, as my son would say. But you put it in front of a certain word and suddenly it's the opposite. It's silliness. The way Mr. Mustache's name instantly transport you to the identity of him being a clown. So it's really great to talk to you, and I want to back up a little bit and I want to start with the basics, which is where are you from? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? And
really?
And then we'll get into the performance stuff.
Well, let's see. Okay, that's a long story. I have an unusual childhood. My dad was an aerospace engineer in Southern California.
Okay.
My mom was a German World War II refugee, came over when she was 10. And I grew up the first 9 years of my life then in Southern California. And then we moved to Europe for 8 years. And we lived in Paris for 4 years, in Brussels for 3 years, and in Bad Godesberg, Germany for a year. And so I went to French schools for 4 years. Then I went to international schools for 4 years. And so I had quite a different childhood than some people, I guess. My parents were avid explorer travelers, not in the, more in the culture sense than in the nature sense.
Okay.
And so we saw a lot of Europe, and I was inside a lot of churches, which I found really boring.
Sure.
And not because I was Jewish, it was just because I was like, why are we here? And they wanted to appreciate the Baroque versus this style. And I was like, who cares, But that's the way I was, I wanted to, I remember once we were in this church in England, and it was a real quaint church, with wooden beams and everything. And I thought, wow, this is really comfortable. This is cool. And I'm just getting into it. My mom would go, oh, we're in the wrong place. Come on.
Did you find that hard at all?
Um,
Sort of transplanting yourself from the U.S. to France and then to Germany?
well, I mean, there were some major challenges. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That psychologically it sends you for a loop because we moved 3 times, 4 times in my formative years, and I changed schools each time.
Right.
And it was kind of
Navigate
brutal,
different
actually.
language.
A few times were kind of brutal. Moving and several other times weren't too bad, but it was. So the family unit becomes a much stronger unit because they're the people that are consistently with you.
Right.
That's true for sure.
Well, can you tell me how you got started performing? You said at the beginning of our conversation that you were a street performer and a juggler. How did you end up on the street?
Well, so we moved back to the States when I was 17. I went to UC Davis.
Okay.
My brother was already in the university, and my first year in college, he came back. He was in Massachusetts. We were then by then we were back in Southern California, and he taught us all to juggle. My younger brother and I, that is. And it took me forever. My younger brother, in 5 minutes, he was juggling, but I was a klutz all my life, and it was like, but this was like a challenge. I was going to get this. It took like 2 weeks before I could do 3 balls. And at some point, and it became a hobby. And and I moved to San Francisco after college in '79, and there was a very big juggling community, and we would gather every Sunday on the Golden Gate Park because they closed off the park to cars, and it was just an amazing gathering of 100, 150 jugglers and friends. And that was where I learned a lot. And there were some street performers who were down at the pier and at the wharf at that time who would come and visit. And I was aware of that. And I was like, in the back of my mind someplace, I was like, I wonder if I could do that. I was at the time, had just found a job at the Pacific Stock Exchange.
Oh, wow.
And that was a total by chance, desperate for work, go into the wrong building for an interview. And the security guard says, no, it's not here, but we're hiring.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I stood as an MQTO, a market quote terminal operator, on the floor of the options exchange in the pit with all the traders listening to they would shout out what the bid and ask were for each option. And my job was to keep that information accurate on the screen. And they would shout out, make those 2/3 at 3, no, there's no 2/3, make that 3/4 at 7/16, so whatever it was. And you go, blah, 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 blah. And that was my job. And I practiced my juggling on my breaks. And I was really not happy being employed. I wasn't totally unhappy, but I said, this is not what I want out of my life.
Yeah.
And since I lived in Europe as a kid, I decided I'm going to go back to Europe and visit. And this was in 81. And I did. I went there this summer. I visited good friends of mine who lived in the Alps in France. And I didn't dare go on the street and perform, but they pushed me. They knew that I kind of wanted to. And they took me to this little town of Annecy, which is the Venice of the Alps. Lots of walking streets, little canals, and lots of tourists. And I did a show, and I had fun. And that got me going. And I spent the summer performing. And I traveled through Europe, and I performed. And I came home broke and with college debt. And I was determined to keep going, but I decided that the weight of the college debt was too much. So I went back to work for a year and a half until I paid off all my debts. Merrill Lynch, Pearce, Fenner, and Smith were my employers because as I had experience in the stock exchange, that was the only place I could find work was with stock brokers. Yeah, that's the way it goes. So
and those are considered good jobs now. I mean, working for Merrill Lynch is a really solid gig.
Well, I could probably, I went, in the pandemic times now, it's kind of like, woof, did I make the right choice? Way back then.
Right.
No, of course. And so I paid off my debts after a year and a half. I quit my job and I took my car and I drove to Montreal because all I knew is I wanted to perform in French. I had decided that I wanted to perform in French. And so turned out that Montreal had a great street scene. I mean, really fantastic. And I was able to just fit right in and do 2 shows nightly on this wonderful walking street full of not tourists so much as the suburbanites who were coming into town for dinner and just an evening. And they have a saying in Quebec called le fun, the fun. And they were looking for le fun. And after the show come up and they go, bah, c'était bien le fun, ça, that really was the fun. And, and so it was a wonderful environment. It wasn't like you were trying to grab people to watch you. It was like they wanted a show. It was very much like as my career developed, at first when I was performing in street theater festivals all over Europe for many years. And there, the people are coming to the festival looking, with the program and, oh, he's playing at this time and so on. And you have audiences. Anyway, so I think the main thing about that whole experience was that I discovered my funny doing those shows that first summer. I was a juggler. At that point, I was a medium juggler. And I could do some nice tricks. But it wasn't the nice tricks that resonated at the end of the show. As, oh, they laughed at that. Oh, they laughed at that. And I recognized that was what I was really enjoying. And I started pointing myself in that direction during the summer. And I got, as I said, that my first gigs came out of that summer. It was a pretty funny story, actually. Mitch Podolak, who just passed away, a wonderful guy who did an amazing amount of work with folk festivals and children's theater festivals in Canada, one of the founders of the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and a musician, and a wonderful guy all around, revered. He comes up to me at the end of the show, and this man is not a small man. He's a very large man, and he's got a grimy beard, and he's smoking a cigarette, and his hair is all oily, and he's wearing all black. And I'm like, and he comes up to me and goes, "You want a job?" With a gruff voice. I'm like, oh man, they're drunk. It was like my first impression, or thought, I guess. And then his wife and sons come up and stand next to him, and I turn over the leaf and I say, oh, he's wearing blue jeans. Oh, he's kind of a worker guy. Okay, who are you? And it turns out that he wanted to bring me to the folk festival and the children's festival the following year, and a few other festivals. So all of a sudden I had this pathway open up, and that pathway continued to develop. In 85, in 84 already, I went back to Europe in the summer or the fall and the spring, and in 85 again. And there I started getting gigs in what was just starting, the European Street Theater Festival world. And I was at some of the very first festivals, and it became, especially in France, a circuit. And I was doing 20 or 30 festivals every summer until 2001. And that was wonderful. One, it's outdoors, and so there's always spontaneity. Mm-hmm. And two, it's always a family audience, because these are festivals that are free. And for clowning, being able to play with kids and adults at the same time, not doing a kids show, but the children's laughter opens up the adults, and it just becomes this very magical place. And it's hard to get that in the theater. It's possible, of course. However, most theaters are either booking kids shows or adult shows. And, so there's not as many family shows. At least that's my experience.
I love that idea. That's a really great insight. Now, when you say you found your funny, how does that relate to clowning? And do you consider yourself a clown?
Both.
Right. That's sort of, the term clowning might be for academics. I certainly studied that when I was doing theater and theater in undergraduate school, but maybe that's not a label that you use for yourself.
I don't have anything for or against it. I mean, yes, I love clowning. I mean, real clowning, but the word has been usurped in many directions.
Sure.
Especially in somehow in Anglophone culture, a little more than in other culture, but the concept of the evil clown, which is rather recent, the horror clown, I mean, the whole it phenomenon,
Sure.
the commercialization of clown by Bozo, not so much, but more by Ronald McDonald, and what seems to be a cultural naivete as to the theatrical possibilities of clown, and that there's a large movement of clowning that involves the exterior look and activity. So if you look at the World Clown Association, and there's nothing, these are great people, their understanding of clown is how well you look, by putting on the makeup, how perfect is your makeup, your manners, yes, your ability to do magic tricks or blow balloons or whatever it is, and the concept of being an entertainer, which is about pleasing an audience or making an audience happy, which is fine, which is really my goal. But I also find there's a superficiality that's so dominant in that culture because it's about what you put on.
Right. It certainly has become a loaded term. And when I tell people that I have a background in clowning, and this is decades ago, a decade ago for me now, more than, the reaction I get almost every time is I'm either scared of clowns or clowns in Washington as a derogatory term, or it's almost pop culture to dislike clowns or be afraid of clowns. And what I have always understood clowning to be, and the thing I didn't do as a stage actor, right, was, or a stand-up comedian, was break the fourth wall and connect with your audience. That was something unique to clowning that I have always carried with me, was the ability to look at an audience member directly in the eye. And whether or not you're going to engage with them verbally or physically, it was just about being able to shatter what that barrier. And so clowning to me is about connection, very much so.
Very much so. I can bring up for you,
Sure.
Since I'm in my teaching. Let me see if the program is open. I can't share screen. Never mind. Zoom infiltrates.
Yeah.
But my teacher, Zone 84, I started taking workshops. I was totally untrained, and I took a workshop with Richard Pachinko, who's he's a great guy. And he talked about the connection as the magic circle in between the audience and the stage. And that you give energy to the magic circle and you listen to what comes back. And that magic circle starts to resonate because more energy is being added into it. And really it becomes an intersection, and that the clown lives in that Venn diagram, in that intersection. And without that intersection, the clown isn't really alive. And it's not only clown, although I don't know enough. I don't know if anybody does really. If you look at the clown growing through the circus tradition, to what degree at that point in the 1800s and the 1900s was that interactivity with the audience part of it? Because if you go to a circus, the clown is bigger, is more demonstrative, and it's a different style there. Not always, because there are great modern clowns who are going in and getting volunteers and who are going around and playing with the audience, So that intersection is a big part of it. I think the other thing for me is also that the humor element can be more profound, can be, what Richard Pachinko worked with and what I work with as a teacher is that there's always an emotional content behind what's going on. and you can actually inject humor into that emotion. And that is also a laughter point for the audience. So if the clown gets scared, and how they played the scared,
Right.
and the fun they have in being scared is going to create laughter. Not just the structural functions of the piece, which can also create laughter by breaking expectations, but how it's played. And that, to me, is vital. And I think that's where that connection comes in, and that the clown is going for the laughs. So if they're listening well and they're hearing that something's funny and they have, if their structure allows, they're going to play with that moment. They're not just going to let it go, because the whole point is laughter. So, hey, come on, let's have fun with this.
Right.
And so I think that aspect of the interactivity is also, that's a big deal. And so if you've got this, if you can't transcend the makeup, because I do know great clowns who transcend their makeup. It's not like the makeup is a hindrance, but there's a lot of clowns who hide behind the makeup, right, or hide behind the nose. Okay, I'm just going blah, 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 blah.
No, I'm loving it. You're talking to I don't do this anymore for a living, but I've always felt rooted in these skills. And as a performer, I really liked long form improv, which is really all about talking and words. And I like Shakespeare and the American classics and all of that stuff. And obviously, in a theater education program, you're going to study a lot of texts. But what was so powerful about clowning to me was that it didn't need all the words. And it scared me a lot, because especially in our society where we're sending texts and emails 100 times a day, we're scrolling our social media, which is mostly words. Being without words and still trying to communicate, or still trying to, for the clown to achieve an objective, but without the tool of words, is really challenging. But on the other end, like you said, it can be profound.
Yeah.
It can be profound when they find that thing, or they make that connection. So anyway, I don't want to talk too much about myself.
No, but I mean, that brings up a great point. Because I teach a lot, right? And
right.
I'm teaching both in the Zen and spiritual worlds, as well as in the clown and theatrical worlds. And the nonverbal communication is touching a different place in our being. Mm-hmm. The words we interpret through our brain, if you take the words out of it, we're interpreting that the actions with other senses. And so for me, part of the work, if you want to call it work, is to take people out of their everyday world into, the clown invites them into some magical sphere, right? And the whole idea is to get them out of their thoughts. So if you can actually work with nonverbal language, then you're really achieving, or you're facilitating that possibility.
Well, this is a great segue, I think, to the Medical Clown Project. Let me ask you, how did you initially get involved as a performer with Medical Clown Project?
Well, it's a long road, once again. Having 35 or 40 years under the belt, someplace in between the two. So in 95 to 98, here in San Francisco, Make a Circus started the Funny Bone Doctors. And for 2.5 years or so, we were going into CPMC and General Hospital twice a week. And I was one of there were 3 of us, and I was one of them. So I was, very active as Dr. Yoo-Hoo. So right there, I understood the values of it. And it was in parallel with the work I had started doing in refugee camps in conflict zones that started in 87. And then in 95, I founded Clowns Without Borders in the US, an organization that started in 93 in Spain. I brought it over. That was after 94. I went with the French Clowns Without Borders to Croatia, and was very moved by the whole experience. it wasn't my first rodeo in the refugee world, but it was just so powerful. There were 9 of us performing an hour-and-a-half circus show that was just wonderful. You know, it was, and people were really moved, and you could really feel the value of that as a performer, the social context. And you know, the medical clowning has exactly the same power. It's just a different context. But again, it's taking the clowning out of the theater and bringing it where it's most needed or where it can really make a difference. And so that's really how I got into it. I mean, because I recognized that value, and you know, in between 98 and about a year and a half ago when I joined the Medical Clown Project, I had done a fair amount here and there, and I on Clowns Without Borders trips, you know, in various contexts. And I had really, I mean, I've been teaching workshops on a regular basis since 2001, and you know, just about every year, I'm doing 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 day trainings for a medical clown organization in Europe, and delving in with them into their world and looking for, you know, how I can refresh, renew, deepen, invigorate what they do. So I've been involved for quite a while on that level. Yeah.
That's amazing. And that's, you know, sometimes when people are at the beginning of their performance careers, they're not necessarily thinking about service and thinking about being of service to people. You know, a lot of, you know, I think probably a lot of people get started for the wrong reasons, or I certainly was a person who chased laughs. I was addicted to laughs. But it's you know, as you get older and you're looking for ways to give back and be a builder in your community, and you know, this seems like such a great way to use your, you know, your unique skill set and your unique experience set to be out there and be sewing up the fabric of our society. So thank you for doing that and being part of our organization. I've seen you work. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the work and its effect on patients and their families, and also probably the medical staff. I mean, I know Jeff talks about, especially when you're physically able to go into the building, you know, prior to the pandemic, that you're a performer the whole time, and you're able to, you know, use your powers the whole time, that your powers for good and your powers of connection to every person you interact in the facility. Tell us a little bit about what you've observed, you know, from your vantage point as the performer, that happens in the families and the patients.
Well, first, I just want to say it's a great privilege and honor to be doing this work, and I mean, I immediately go way back to the Funny Bone doctors, because we used to be, you know, in 95, 98, the medical community, I mean, it was a little freer. You know, it wasn't quite, you know, now it's a little more restricted, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just the way it is. And we got pretty wild in the hallways with the nurses and the doctors.
I bet.
And, you know, they consider us part of the team. I mean, you know, it's like, oh, good, our clowns are here. It's not like the clowns, it's like our clowns. And, you know, I know, I've heard stories from the medical clowns in Israel. Actually, I was there a few years ago, and I did a few visits. You know, I joined in, and there were kids that going, "Where's my clown?" You know, it's like it's not just a clown; it's like my clown. You know, it's like, okay, I'm in a new hospital. Who are the clowns here? You know, it's like
I love that.
Well, I think, that I'm not a person with great facility of memory. It's not like I have 1,000 stories lodged in my head about moments I've had. Although I've had a lot of magical moments with patients, and actually mostly with residents, because the Medical Clown Project, we're mostly working with elders, which is is not the same as most of the organizations who are mostly working with kids. And I got scolded the other day for saying patient instead of resident, and I was so thankful for being reminded. It just came out. I mean, it wasn't like I think of them as patients, but um, and there's been several very beautiful moments in the past year of singing a song for a German elder woman I remember at the Jewish home, who one was when I started singing in Yiddish, because I only know one Yiddish song, and I speak German, and she lit up, just lit up, and her heart just opened up. It was because nobody had spoken to her in German, I think, for quite a while. She was isolated. I don't know if she had family, and it just was like the key to a door and that happens occasionally with music, because music touches memory for dementia patients. And I actually wrote about this recently, because I was singing Sentimental Journey also at the San Francisco Jewish Center for Living, is the correct name, not too long ago. And this was by Zoom actually too. And I was singing Sentimental Journey, and the woman who I was interacting with, she didn't just start singing along, she was shouting words, Sentimental Journey! And with this full force of her joy alive. And it just like, you just kind of have to, I'm in wonder. I'm just like, wow, I don't know how this came about, but how beautiful just to witness this. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. And I think about your role, having again witnessed you and Mr. Mustache in action a couple of months back, that you're almost like a vessel, you're almost like a room that resident can occupy for a moment, and there's freedom in that room, and I think that your story illustrates that. Certainly, we know that music has a special impact on memory, and that can cut through some of the diseases of age and dementia and Alzheimer's. That and it can be a window, and it can be unfortunately a brief window. But given that you're performing with your collection of skills, one of them being music, I think it's you're sort of the right vessel for allowing people wherever they are to open up a little bit, like we talked about a moment ago, to be to access some part of themselves that maybe they don't have access to all the time. And I think that's really special. Now, I was able to see you work because obviously during the pandemic, we're having to reach out remotely, just as you and I are right now, from our various bunkers, our respective bunkers.
Yes, my bunker.
Yep. And can you talk a little bit about what that's been like, and whether I'm sure it's been difficult. I imagine you would rather be there in person. I know I certainly would rather be rubbing elbows and connecting with people, with real eye contact. But tell me a little bit about what that's been like for you as a performer.
Well, most of it has been as a teacher, actually, because my main gig is teaching nowadays. And I can't travel, and most of my work has been in Europe for the past 20 or however many years. So I am doing everything remotely. I'm finding it really interesting. On the performing level, it's a little challenging, and at the same time, there are still moments of magic. Um, it's challenging, of course, because you can't touch people, and the physical presence. You can feel somebody's vibes. You know, you can feel their energy. Your subconscious reads a person coming into the room and sends signals to your being about, you know, who these people are. You know, and that's not there. Um, and I was musing because I was listening to, there was a Alzheimer's Day all day long Zoomathon coming out of Europe of clown teachers working with people. You know, they're doing workshops, and it was all on Alzheimer's, dementia, um, and Melissa Holland from Canada was talking about fixed point, which is a mind term, and there she's using it as saying, well, you have to give them time for them to register who you are. So you walk into the room with a very simple offer and you say, hi, I'm here to do such, such. And then she wants you to freeze for 3 seconds to give them time to absorb that, say, to situate themselves, because it takes them longer to situate themselves. Of course, I prefer the term stillness to fixed point, because I feel it's like not doing anything more. It's not like you freeze like you're frozen. It's like you're just there. And so I was trying to do that with the video. You know, I was trying to focus in on that through the Zoom, and it's such a different world. You know, and you're also being introduced by somebody, which is great. So they're saying, this is so-and-so, and you don't know if that person can see you really, or hear you really. And so the first minute or so is kind of, you're going, okay, they do, they hear it. You know, you're kind of listening acutely for signals as to how well they're following you, because you're not there in person. So, but I think that once the connection is established, then something can happen. You know, my mom is deep in Alzheimer's land in LA, and her sight isn't going so well these days. And I FaceTimed her, because also I can't go visit her, you know, due to the pandemic. And she's treating it like a phone call now. However, the tone of voice that one uses transmits so much emotional information. I know that as a clown teacher, that how, you know, your voice, just that alone can have a tremendous effect. So I feel that we're able to at least connect with people, to break their isolation for a moment, to bring them into our world. It doesn't work every time. It's not quite as consistent as if we were there in person. And yet, there's a lot of magic happening. So that's great. For me personally, you know, as you were talking about service, you know, at this point in my life, I'm here to serve. And like, okay, so what can I do? And the first thing, because I've been doing some work in the corporate sector, and I've been doing some work, you know, as I was saying, in Zen centers and all kinds of different places. And I've been approaching clown from a different angle, from the angle of just your sense of levity, your sense of humor, activating it, using it both as a mindfulness tool and as a communications tool, and, you know, developing nonverbal communication, all these kinds of things. And I took it to levity pause. Let's have a levity pause. And I started doing with Clowns Without Borders in the springtime. We do a weekly levity pause. And it was originally like 30 minutes, and then it became 40 minutes. And then I started doing one with the Zen Peacemakers International. And I was finding all of a sudden that people were really enjoying that, you know, that you could actually, and I think part of it is breaking the cycle of fear. This is my latest big theory, is that especially in our current environment, both political, environmental, whatever you want, there's a lot of fear circulating. No matter how good you are at embodying fear and accepting and working with it, it's still very present. And my question is, so if you take a look at a teeter board and you put your equanimity in the middle, and you've got fear on one side and let's say joy on the opposite side, how can you keep your equilibrium if it's always being pushed down from the fear side? As much as you push on the equanimity and meditate for as long as you want, it's still not a counterbalance. It's going to be a solidity, but it's not going to. And I'm finding that a practice of joy, any practice of joy, and I think a lot of people have found this, they're looking for what is a practice of joy that's going to keep me sane in this environment. What can I do? And so I started finding these levity pauses were really great tools in that domain. And so I've kind of been pursuing that this summer, this fall now. I'm going to offer one with at the San Francisco Zen Center, November, December, with Zach Smith, who's a Zen teacher. And so we'll combine everything together. And I'm just looking for avenues. How can I serve people? What do they need? And how can I reach out? No, I can't really perform on stage. That's clear. So, and I mean, I've done a lot of little videos. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll find, because like I came back from Europe right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was quarantined for 14 days. And so every day I made like a video, improvised little spontaneous video of like 30 seconds, whatever, you know, just being funny, just having fun. And then, so I like that. So I kept on doing, I don't do one every day, but occasionally I get, and I create those. But it's not the same thing as going in front of an audience and being present with them.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of a levity pause. I feel like that is the medical clown's function for people who are, you know, dealing with either serious medical issues or issues with age, and they're, you know, in residence where they're not able to leave. Certainly that's a prescription for our age and our time.
Yeah.
You know, so my wife works in mental health, and it's certainly a practice there too, you know, finding ways to experience joy in a time that in a stagnant world, right? We're not able to leave our homes, or not able to leave our homes very often. How to access joy, even though our environment's not changing. We're stuck with the same people, and you know, we're in an age of pressure and stress, and joy can be the antidote to that. It's the anti-stress.
I really think that. You know, I have to give credit to Steve Gross, who started Project Joy, which was working with kindergarten teachers or preschool teachers even, on finding an alternative to the discipline method of education and working with play and joy. And very successful. And it's grown. It's now Playmakers for Life. I forget, some big t-shirt company sponsors them, and they're doing a lot of great work. And his main thing with the training, when he was training these teachers, because we did a workshop, Clowns Without Borders and Project Joy together, and exchanged philosophies and methods of work. And they were demanding of those teachers that they have a practice of joy, and that they spend at least a half an hour every week doing their practice of joy, whether it's playing the cello or playing tennis or whatever it is, you know, at least a half an hour, or maybe it was an hour. But the point being that, you know, unless they were keeping that really functioning alive, it was going to be, you know, they're not going to be able to transmit that to the kids.
Well, and it's very interesting. And I think that with our culture, you know, our education system sort of discourages play and discourages silliness and discourages, you know, especially adult men in particular. They get trained out. It gets trained out of them, the ability to be silly. And one thing that clown can do, or, you know, different like comedic arts can do, is they can allow space for them to at least experience that in someone else, experience silliness or a lack of self-awareness for just a moment, or actually what is actually real self-awareness, but being willing to go outside of your, traditional masculine mask or whatever it is. And so, and also I was going to say, I've got a 3-year-old, and my most effective tactic for his what we call the grumpies is playfulness. Like we get in a cycle where I'm trying to get him to do something and he's resisting, whether it's eat dinner or whatever, and he can get so, sort of mad and serious and sad or grumpy, and the way to pierce that is with a moment of joy. I have to experience the moment of joy, and it brings him right along.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So
I've been doing this whole interview with the camera off to the side. I'm realizing, because I was just looking at my video going, oh, I'm looking out this way the whole time. Oh, well.
That's the problem with our age. My camera's right up here, so.
Yeah. I'm working with a webcam that's standing on my ClickPad right now, because the webcam on my laptop died, so I had to.
Oh, gosh.
Well, no, actually, I have a better image theoretically.
Yeah, no, it looks good. It looks very good.
Yeah. I've been working on part of the Zoom thing. Is like, okay, so what kind of lighting do you have? And I just replaced the 5,000K lights with 2,700K lights because they were just too bright, and I moved them from the ceiling to the wall. I just spent the last 3 days rebuilding that. And that was the main concern when I first was like, okay, I was like, get your studio together. Speaking of pandemic and adjusting to, it was like, oh, now I need to have a broadcasting studio at home. Okay.
Yeah.
And
I just listened to an interview with a documentarian about the pandemic. And so they filmed in the last 3 months. And what they did is they gave people these units with laptops and a camera, and that they instructed them to connect it to their Wi-Fi. And then the cinematographer could control the camera, the iris, and the settings, and all of the settings remotely, but the person didn't have to be exposed to another person. And that got around having to quarantine somebody to bring them into your home. But
right, wow.
We're just in an age where we're all having to become cinematographers, basically.
Hi. Oh, yes. And there's a delay too, yeah.
Well, Mr. Yuhu, thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I'm glad I got to know you a little bit.
Yeah, Dale, I appreciate the time, and I didn't get to know you too well, but now I know you a lot more than I did previously.
Yeah. So I just a little bit about me. I went to law school years ago, but before that I was a clown. With Andrew. I don't know if you know Andrew Quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna work with him soon. Yeah.
He's one of my best friends in the whole world, and he got me involved in clowning, and he pushed me towards it because I was so dependent on the word, on the written word, on the spoken word, and he and I did some great stuff together as college students, and my interests sort of, I didn't follow a direct path, and I work in recruiting now, so I talk a lot for a living. I make lots of phone calls and things like that for the legal industry. But I'm really glad to be working with MCP because I was looking for a way to give back and a way to, for me, it's got a dual benefit. There's the real mission of the project, which is to work with the residents and the patients and their families and the staff, and to provide those levity breaks, those levity pauses. But also, I think anything that supports artists, even if it's just once or twice a month, as I know, it's pretty limited what we can do at this point, but is important to me because I have a lot of artist friends. Tyler and I were in college together, and we have a friend, Kelsey, who was part of Cirque du Soleil, and a lot of people are out of work right now, and it is a really tough time for performers.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that I've got that I can teach. that I focus on teaching, because otherwise, yeah, I'd be like, where's the work, you know?
Where's the work?
Yeah.
And on the other side, someday this pandemic will be over, or mostly over, and we're all going to be able to gather again. And I'm really looking forward to that because, if you look historically at the 1918 pandemic, just a couple of years later, we were meeting in massive groups, and there will be a revival and a new energy around being together and performing in particular. It's going to be special, and we're going to, technology can only take us so far. Humans want to be together. And so,
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. Before we go, a quick story about Andrew. So Andrew and I, we've been doing, we did quite a number of the Laguna Honda sessions together, and we developed this ritual of greeting everybody by bowing together. And so as clowns, we'll move to each person, then together bow to them very slowly, giving them time, and then to the next person. And we love it. We have a great time with that. Yeah. And it, just kind of came out of nowhere. Well, yeah. I also do a lot because in the Zen world, they're always bowing. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I do, because I'm part of the order of disorder, which is like the contrarian side of clown. Part of clown that people don't remember or don't know is about the indigenous side of the nature of clown goes back thousands of years, right? And in many cultures, the clown is the contrarian.
Yes.
Doing everything backwards and upside down. So because, in Zen you bow, right? I decided that we have to bow backwards. And that came because I was teaching the Zen master, and we were doing stuff in Zen centers. And I was like, well, let's clown this, and so that became a backwards bow. And I use that. That's to this day when I close a meeting or a workshop or whatever, we all bow backwards together.
Oh, that's so neat. You're a builder of ritual, Mr.
Hallelujah. Are you ready? On the count of three. Okay. 1, with humor in your eyes. 2, 3, hop. All right.
Thank you. It was great spending some time with you, and I hope you have a great afternoon, okay?
Thank you. Great spending time with you, too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, see ya.
That's for Calvin. We waved at each other, which is what Calvin wanted at the end.